Welcome everyone to Night Seder as part of Winter Zman 2021-2022. Tonight's class is Sefer Tehillim and the story of how and why Tefillah grows. Tonight with Dr. A.J. Berkovitz, we will learn about how if you open any modern siddur, you will find numerous passages from Sefer Tehillim, and indeed, Tehillim seems almost naturally suited for use in daily Tefillah, yet perspective offered by hindsight often obscures complexity and challenge. This shiur will examine how and why Jewish liturgy changes, grows, and develops by exploring the dynamic history of singing psalms in Jewish daily liturgy from the Bible period through the era of the Geonim. It will tell the story of the Psalter's rise, fall, and resurrection as a central feature of Jewish worship. It will then explore the various internal characteristics as well as external factors that explain why Tehillim reemerged as part of Jewish daily prayer during the period of the Amoraic Rabbis. Ultimately, the Psalter's liturgical history sheds light on the story of Jewish prayer as a whole developed, how the order of prayer transformed from the shema and the amidah into the services we know today. And for those who aren't familiar with Dr. Berkovitz, he is a scholar of Jewish antiquity. He received his PhD in religions of Mediterranean antiquity from Princeton and a BA from Yeshiva University. He has a forthcoming book, A Life of Psalms, coming out, and he has also written been the co-editor of Rethinking Authority in Late Antiquity, Authorship, Law, and Transmission in Jewish and Christian Tradition. He was a Star Fellow at Harvard, as well as a Wexner Graduate Fellow, and he is currently serving as Assistant Professor of Ancient Judaism and Liturgy at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in New York. Also, I would like to kind of put up a nota bene in advance of tonight's class. We have been having some technical issues at Drisha. We have had some website and email downtime over the past day. And if you were on our website and you ran into any of these problems, we just want you to know that your information is secure. But if you tried to reach us by email and you were unable to, please send it again. We always like to hear from you, and we may not have seen your emails, your questions, your complaints in the last 2 days. In the meantime, Dr. Berkovitz, it's good to have you. It's good to have you at Drisha.
Thank you. It's great to be here. All right. So let me first apologize for two things. First, the academies of that shiur introduction. Let's actually say that again, but in plain English. But also, and I guess more importantly, you have two media. There's the handout, which I hope was sent out, and you should have. If not, maybe we could share it on the chat occasionally, and also a PowerPoint presentation, which should be on your screens, right? That would be excellent. Okay, so with that, we can begin. I'm really excited to share this material with you, in part because when I attend shul, pick up a siddur and sort of flip through it as one does during davening, as opposed to actually, praying, it always strikes me, why is this thing so darn big? How did we get from the earliest rabbinic stratum of liturgy, which is essentially shema and amidah, to this massive thick tome, and then to many massive thick tomes, right? That's really the question that we're going to be engaging with today. I want to sort of give us the tools for thinking about some of the larger historical developments and trends and methods that allow us to make sense of the evolution of the siddur. And I'd like us to do it today by focusing specifically on one case study, namely the early history of Sefer Tehillim, right? If you open up and down the siddur, there's Tehillim everywhere. So what we're going to do is explore Sefer Tehillim and use that as a window into the history of the siddur and Jewish liturgy as a whole. Our time together will be in two parts. The first part, we'll do a brief history, timeline of the use of Sefer Tehillim in Jewish liturgy, and then we'll spend more of our time together discussing the various reasons of how and why Tehillim grows. So that's the two parts. So let's begin with part one. If anyone has any questions, use the raise hand feature ideally, because I probably can see you, and I'm happy to pause if needed. All right, so at first glance, especially if we're biased from the modern siddur, it seems almost obvious that Sefer Tehillim should arrive with meteoric impact on the scene of Jewish literature inevitably be like liturgical from the get-go. But if we look throughout actual historical evidence, it's not necessarily the case. Between sort of the earliest evidence of Sefer Tehillim, maybe even earlier, at least the Second Temple period, through the rise of the Geonim, I'll go through the chart in just a moment, Sefer Tehillim as liturgy, or as daily liturgy, right, something you say every day, actually undergoes a really weird, strange historical development. In its earliest layer, during the Piety period, there's one thing we can be certain about. During the Beit HaMikdash, the priests and the Levites were singing Tehillim as part of the temple service. There's evidence for this already in the Book of Chronicles. There's evidence for this internally to the Sefer Tehillim, right? You read through the book, half of it's, I will give a sacrifice to you, my Lord, right? Nidarai ladonai hashalem. Let me fulfill my vow offering. So clear this stuff is being sung in the temple. Except something strange then happens, at least with the use of Sefer Tehillim as daily liturgy. Once the temple is destroyed, and particularly during the Tannaitic era of Judaism, this is the period of Judaism, the early rabbis, so temples destroyed in 70, 200, Sefer Tehillim does not seem to be part of daily rabbinic worship. There is evidence for use of psalms, particularly in Hallel, in the Mishnah and the Tosefta, and the earliest layers of rabbinic Judaism, but there is almost no evidence for the use of Tehillim as Tefillah, right? The rabbis pretty much lavish attention on shema and amidah. Tehillim sort of, poof, seems to vanish. We'll discuss this a little more soon. During the Amoraic period, right, the era of the later rabbinic sages, 200 CE to 600 CE, Psalms starts to slowly reemerge as part of Jewish tefillah. The little snippets of psukim before and after the amidah, right? So Adonai sifatai tiftach, ufia gitatecha, right? Lord, let my lips open and let my prayers be received. Like that stuff's in Amoraic literature. But the moment we move to the Geonic period, right, 650 to 1037, the era of the first and earliest actual siddur we have, Tehillim starts to appear everywhere. So when you correlate this evidence, right, what's the basic historical question? What do you think? What happened in the Amoraic period, right? Why does Tehillim go from almost nothing as part of daily liturgy to, by the Geonic period, being omnipresent, ever present? So that's what we're going to explore today, right? What happened to Tehillim? And more than that, what can we learn about the history of Jewish liturgy by looking at what happened to Sefer Tehillim? Let's skip this for now. All right, so let me throw this back at you for a moment, right? Where else today, in our modern context, do we find Sefer Tehillim outside of Jewish liturgy? What are some places? So, all right, we think of Tehillim as obviously liturgical, but where else might it appear? I see Jason has his hand up.
Is that a signal to unmute?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Christian liturgy?
Yes, of course. Obviously, Psalms are woof and warp throughout Christian liturgy. If we have time, we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But you know what? For now, let's keep our attention on the Yidden. Right? We're in Jewish Judaism, I'll say. Do we find Sefer Tehillim? Ellen?
There are a lot of people who say Tehillim as a more or less petitionary thing for when people are sick or when there are other disasters.
Absolutely, right? So you go to, after a disaster, I mean, there's a whole Tehillim COVID session for COVID. When someone is sick, they say Tehillim, but these are the sort of pietistic, possibly maybe even magical uses of Tehillim. Kayla.
Two comments from the chat. Gabriel Kretzmer Seed points out that Tehillim show up in Hallel. Sivan points out Tehillim show up in Kiddush Levana. And Noah points out that they show up as source material in Talmudic discussions.
Yes, absolutely. So we're talking, so I asked specifically about the modern period. Hallel is interesting because Hallel was is a holdover from the Second Temple period, because Hallel was never really part of the liturgy. Hallel was initially, this is a whole other discussion for a whole other time. The origins of Hallel probably lie in the Passover Seder, and then get carried on in Jewish liturgy throughout. And of course, we'll talk about Talmud discussions and Teolim. But yes, right, Teolim for the most part, in a modern context, right, is in addition to liturgy, is also found in petitionary prayers, in pietistic elements. What I have here right now is 2 snapshots from my own shul bulletin, circa May 25th, 2018, about this very particular petitionary use of Teolim. Does anyone read one of these to get a sense of how modern Jews are using Teolim? And we're going to use this to backtrace a fairly consistent pattern of psalm use in antiquity. Jason, go for it.
Teolim initiative. Infertility is not discussed as much as the shidduch crisis, but sadly is still something that plagues our people. Therefore, Penina Elmikis started a 40-day Teolim initiative. This initiative breaks up Sefer Tehillim over 40 days to pray for couples who are struggling to have children. For more information, email teolimforinfertility@gmail.com or WhatsApp Penina Elmikis 347.
Yeah, exactly. So just a nice modern example of using Teolim for the purposes of petition, for the purposes of piety. And in fact, it's not just abstract. This was from Google today, or Amazon, right? One also finds Teolim in a modern context, right? Embedded in just the material realia, right? The sort of life material settings of Jews and probably Christians as well. Right, you have your vintage psalm stickers. On the right side, you have a nice necklace, which of course has a good protective verse. The Hebrew there is Adonai Magen Ba'adi Kavodi Modim Roshi. The Lord is a shield for me, my honor, and the lifter up of my head. So we see that in a modern context, Teolim isn't just part of the standard formalized Jewish liturgy, but it is also a part of piety and Judaism's material reality. Nisan, you had a question.
Yeah, routinely when I am at check-in to fly to Israel, and I'm asked, yesh lecha neshek, or in English, are you bearing any arms? And I say, only my Sefer Tehillim, and I always get a smile. No one ever, from the security, bats an eyelash or blinks an eye.
Absolutely, right. It's in fact that itself, not that we had 100,000 hours, but that itself has a very long history. The use of Teolim, as actually we'll talk about it in a second. Chaya.
Sorry, I didn't catch. Where is this necklace from? Is this commercially available now, or?
Yeah, I just pulled it off of Amazon.
Oh wow!
Like a few hours ago. So yeah, you can. So why is it so important? What is this? Life and materiality of Psalms in our modern context teach us about the growth and development history of liturgy. And for that, we need to recognize that the use of Teolim as protection, as petition, as magic and piety has a long and storied history. What you see in front of you right now is an image of an Egyptian boy, taken from a sarcophagi. If you notice around his neck, right, is a necklace, and that little box there, that's an amulet, right? And it's not just Christians who are wearing amulets. If you look at Mishnah Shabbat 6.2, does anyone want to read? You can read in English or in Hebrew just to set the scene. Any takers? Ellen.
A person may not go out with various things. And it may really mean a man, though there may be women there too, with an amulet when it is not from an expert. I think the point being that some things are efficacious and some things are not, and otherwise it's just.
You're just carrying, and that's usher, period. But if it's a proven amulet or amulet by an expert, right, it's fine. So what might be in such an amulet? Well, luckily, we actually have ancient sources of ancient amulets that tell us. So what you see in front of you right now is an image of a Jewish Palestinian Aramaic silver amulet. It was discovered in Tiberia. There's, we're not going to explore the entire amulet today because we can't, but you can notice there's lots of verbiage, some nomina sacra, like holy names and images, and something that looks a little bit disturbing like a swastika, but it's not. But instead, let's focus on the line that's orange here, and that's on the right. In the ancient world, right? To paraphrase Thomas Hobbes about his context, right? Life was nasty, short, and brutish. Living in the ancient world is hard. It stunk to high heavens. You were constantly plagued with lice, with disease. Given the state of COVID, I have to say, thank God for modern medicine. I would rather live today than 1,000 years ago. One of the ways in which people try to protect themselves and cure themselves of the many ailments of daily life was through the use of amulets. These amulets were personal, they were tailored, and as we'll soon see, they tried to invoke any sort of ritual or holy power to get their way, to make them healed. So let's take a look at this amulet. Who wants to read the Aramaic or the English, or the snippet from the amulet? Ellen, go for it.
All right, I'm going to read it in English. Eradicate from the body of Ina, daughter of Zeirti, all severe fever and sickness and illness in the name of the Lord, who is enthroned on the cherubim. Amen, amen. Selah, blessed is he, the Lord of hosts is with us. I got to move my pictures here because the God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. This is one of those things we say a lot.
Yeah, right. So keep that in mind, right? This is one of those things we say a lot. But notice here, right, there's the name of the person who is ill. There's a petition to God to remove the illness. And how is that petition enacted? What sort of ritual power is invoked? In this case, right, a pasuk from Tehillim. Right? So the recitation of Tehillim as a way to prevent and protect illness, it ain't modern. It's pretty ancient. And in this case, it's pretty magical. But it's not just magical. For this, let's turn. This is on the paper source sheet. And this is source 1 on the paper source sheet. This is Yerushalmi Brachot 5:1. Who would like to, would anyone like to read the source? You could do it in English. You could do it in Hebrew / Aramaic, doesn't matter. Go for it, Chaya.
Rabbi Cheskia, Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha, Rabbi Yosef, B'Shem Rabbi Yochanan. לעולם לא יהא הפסוק הזה זז מתוך פיך, השם צבקו עמנו, משגב לנו אלוקי הפסה. רבי יוסי בר עוון, רב אבהו בשם רבי יוחנן וחבריה, השם צבקו אשרי אדמותיך. Rabbi, I'm going to, is it right if I just use their Hebrew names?
Yeah, of course.
Rabbi Cheskia, Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha, Rabbi Yasa, and name of Rabbi Yochanan. Really, this verse should never move from your lips. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Avun, Rabbi Abahu, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan and the colleagues, the Lord of hosts is with us. Fortunate are those who trust in him.
Right. So what we have here is, if in our amulet, in the image we see, it's the use of a particular verse from Teolim to protect and to provide healing. What do we see in this Yerushalmi source? Do we have a similar verse anywhere? Yeah, there's like literally the exact same verse. And what's its function here? What does it sound like? Or I'll frame it this way. Anyone go travel on a bus and, okay, Jason, go for it.
You should just be saying it all the time. So if you're on a bus in Yerushalayim, you see a guy or a girl with a bit of Tehillim just saying Tehillim the whole time while he's on the bus or she's on the bus.
Absolutely, right? So what we see from these two sources are the two sides of the non-liturgical use of Sefer Tehillim, right? First, as magic, and the second as piety. And these sort of uses of Tehillim extend from its earliest periods right through the modern period. What's pretty cool about this verse in particular is who is the ultimate name tradent? Who's the who are these rabbis ultimately quoting? Rabbi Yochanan. And this is might entirely be coincidence, but does anyone know Rabbi Yochanan's good old stomping grounds? Tiberias, the same location of our silver amulets. So the use of the two verses could be coincidence, maybe not. But what is important, right, is we have this particular use of these two verses. These two verses are pretty familiar. Anyone know where they're from? Where might you recognize them? Here's a hint.
Havdalah.
Yeah, absolutely, right? They're straight out of Havdalah, right? And of course, Havdalah, and this is really, we have so much to cover, we're not going to get to it. Havdalah itself is a quasi-magical ritual, right? You're separating time, you're separating holy from profane. But what is interesting to note is that these two verses, which are both found as magic and as piety, eventually transmute to become part of our weekly liturgy, right? We say it as part of Havdalah. Kayla.
A request from the chat. Could you clarify what you mean when you use the term magical from Viva Hammer?
Absolutely. So the word magical, super complicated, super hard to define. For our purposes today, when I use magical, I intend to mean the use of a ritual power to enact change in this world. When I say piety, I mean the repetition of verses to generally enact change in oneself, right? Or to reaffirm, create dispositions. It's a lot more complicated than that, but does it solve your problem for now, Viva? What's important to note is that both of these strains ultimately lead to liturgy. So how does liturgy develop? One way that liturgy develops, which we're going to talk a little bit more, is it moves, right? Teolim, or liturgy, or practices that are non-liturgical, can move from the realm of piety and or magic to the realm of liturgy. A really cool example of this that affects modern tefillah today, and again, this is a whole other shiur, so we can't get into it, is Aleinu L'Shabeach, right? Which we know as, the formal place in liturgy where davening ends, and where we get to, for those who wear talitot, you fold your talis at Aleinu L'Shabeach because you're running out the door. But the truth is, if we look at our earliest siddurim, Aleinu L'Shabeach was a pietistic prayer that was appended to the end of davening by the Hasidei Ashkenaz initially, and eventually over time, because it was there, yeah, well, why not? It gets incorporated into liturgy proper. So one feeder for the growth of liturgy is piety and magic. Let's take a look at another example of this as a feeder by taking a look at source 2, and this is Bavli Brachot 4b. Who would like to read Bavli Brachot source B on the paper handout? Jason, go for it.
Amoraic Elazar bar Avinu Kol HaOmer Tila David B'chol Yom Shalosh Pamim Muftach Lo Shehu Ben Ha'olam Haba. Rabbi Elazar bar Avina said, anyone who recites a praise of David 3 times a day is assured a place in the world to come.
All right, so let me put you on spot. What the heck is going on in this source? We got.
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I can't fight. I'm on a screen.
You need to recite a praise of David. It could just be talking about Tehillim just generally, but it seems like it's talking about a specific psalm 3 times a day. And if you do that, you'll get a place in the world to come. You'll reach the ultimate manifestation of what the Chachamim thought was goodness for Jews.
Absolutely.
I guess.
So Tefillah David, squint hard, 145. Where's 140? Where's 145 in liturgy? Anyone know? There, it goes by a different name.
Isn't it the start of the Ashrei?
Yeah, this is Ashrei. So here's the question about this source. Is this liturgical or is this pietistic? Right. On the one hand, we have this 3 times a day, sounds like Ashrei, right? On the other hand, it's, muftach, it's praiseworthy. He'll become someone who secures the world to come. What do we think?
Pietistic, because I think it's affecting a change within you. It's like you should do this, and the results will be is that you'll be a better person who will merit olam haba.
Right, this doesn't sound like a shiur for tefillah, although the whole 3 times a day is weird, right? Because we say Ashrei 3 times a day. If we're talking about Ashrei, right? You see the sort of tension in this source. So this is why Talmudic manuscripts are really, really important, because if you take a look at the Paris manuscript of the Bavli, and among others, I'm just showing you one, we actually have a completely and totally different girsa. Who would like to read this? It's on screen now. Who would like to read this girsa? Go for it, Debbie.
Amarav Elazar Baravina, Kol HaOmer Tehillim Kuf Mem Hey Tehillah LeDavid B'chol Yom Muftach Lo Shehu Ben Olam Haba.
Yeah, absolutely. Good.
Rav Elazar, son of Avina, said, anyone who recites a Psalm of David, Ashrei, Psalm 145, every day is assured of a place in the world to come.
So, how many times a day are we, according to the Paris manuscript of the Bavli, are we reciting Psalm 145?
Once.
Once, not 3 times. Okay, so now we have our evidence in front of you. What happened? Who can conjecture what happened to Bavli? And of course, what happened to the relationship between liturgy and piety in Rabbinic Judaism? Jason, I see your hand.
I think it developed that people started saying this 3 times a day, and then someone took a pen to the Gemara and just added shalosh, and like that's what I would conjecture what happened. So the Gemara kind of fits with our modern conception of how liturgy works.
Right. So what happened is, right, if before we sort of conjectured the move from piety to liturgy, by using what eventually became part of Havdalah, we can actually see it take place in front of us on the Gemara, right? The actual source of Rabbi Elazar bar Ravina seems to indicate a pious act of, say, Psalm 145. It actually doesn't say Ashrei, and it actually does use the word Ashrei to talk about something else like 5 lines above in the Gemara, which we're not going to get into. So the initial statement was just say this psalm, be pious, do it once a day. Over time, as it became part of Ashrei, and as Ashrei moved from being said once to being said 3 times, right, in medieval Paris, a scribe was like, okay, well, let's amend the statement. Now we're talking about 3 times a day, right? So that's vector number 1, right? So how did Psalms become more popular, or not become more popular? How did Psalms move to liturgy between the period of the Amoraim and the Geonim? Well, one vector that liturgy as a whole develops through is the movement between magic and piety to liturgy, and honestly, vice versa too, probably. Debbie.
It seems to me that to go from saying it once a day, it would require a mindset that's very different than saying it 3 times a day as part of the liturgy. if you say it once a day, they are assuming that you're saying it as part of Psalms and you're thinking about each word, and only that would assure you. It can't be just you're mumbling the words, and that would be enough to assure you a place in the world to come. But if you're saying it 3 times a day in the package deal of other parts of liturgy, you're lowering the expectations also of how much kavana you have when you say it. It's a different ball game then.
Oh, quite possibly. Yeah. And that's why the Talmudic statement in its initial context is about piety. But
Right.
as time develops, right, it becomes liturgized, right? And we see that liturgization happen right on the page of the Gemara. Sivan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was wondering, you start with Netilat Yadayim in the morning, and then Thanksgiving prayer, then there is Shaharit, and then Minha, Marev, and more religious Jews spend time after midnight reading Kabbalah, Zohar, all that. And the amount of time taken is almost like 6 to 8 hours if everything is done as prescribed, as intensely. And is it more suited for rabbis than for the common Jew?
Interesting. So that's an excellent question. I think that that's a question that sort of falls beyond the scope of what we'll get to the common Jew a little bit later. Because right now we're trying to work on figuring out the sort of authorized, so to speak, liturgy, namely how do the rabbis themselves insert and embed Psalms into daily worship. But we will talk a little bit about the common use of Psalms a little bit later. So our first vector is piety, but there's yet another vector to consider. And that, of course, is the lecture or the sermon. In the if you take a look, you go to synagogue, you're there for Shabbos afternoon. Alexa, stop. Okay, she must have heard something. Always spying. So if you go to a shul in Shabbos morning, right? There's a pretty standard format most rabbis have for delivering the Shabbos sermon. You hear it twice, you'll figure it out. In the Amoraic period as well, there was a very typical way that rabbis delivered homilies, and it's called the petichta, right? The opening. It's pretty mechanical. In step 1 from a petichta, which you find in the Amoraic period, right, as opposed to the Tanaitic period, you choose a random verse from Tanakh, it's often from Ketuvim, you interpret that verse, you can offer another interpretation, rinse and repeat, and at the end, right, the last piece of your drasha has to relate to the first verse or the most recently quoted verse of the opening pasuk, verse of that week's Torah reading. So this is the petichta. Let's take a look at one example of a petichta in action. And this is on the paper handout, and it's source 5, Leviticus Rabba. So who would like to read, anyone want to read Leviticus Rabba? This is a sort of an example of a prototypical petichta, right? A kind of sermon that Amoraic rabbis delivered quite occasionally in ancient synagogues. Maybe go for it.
Did you say Debbie?
Yeah, you raised your hand, no?
Right, yeah, okay. So I just have to get it. What? Okay. Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Nachman patach Allah Elokim b'Torah Hashem b'kol shofar b'shah shakadosh baruch hu yoshev olel kisei din b'din hu oleh. My tam Allah Elokim b'Torah ובשעה שישראל נוטלין את שופריהן ותוקעין לפני קדוש ברוך הוא עומד מכיסא הדין ויושב בכיסא רחמים. דכתיב השם בקול שופר, ומתמלא אליהם רחמים ומרחם עליהם והופך עליהם מידת הדין לרחמים. אימתי בחודש השביעי. Rabbi Judah, in the name of Rabbi Nachman, began a homily.
Notice the word patach, right? That's how you know we're in the presence of a patichta. Go on.
God ascends amidst shouts of joy, true The Lord ascends with the call of the horn of the shofar.
Notice it's a quote from Sefer Tehillim, right? I know, go ahead. Right, so that's step one, right? Where this is a short patichta. So you got only one, step 2 and 5. Go ahead.
At the time the Holy One, blessed be he, ascends to the seat of judgment, he ascends for judgment. What's the reason? Hashem ascends in acclamation. And at the time that the Yisrael takes their horns and blows before Hashem, blessed be he stands from the seat of judgment and sits on the seat of mercy, rachamim. As it says, the Lord with the sound, bekol truah. He is filled with mercy on their behalf, and he has mercy upon them and turns over from upon the measure of judgment to that of mercy.
Right, so let's just take a step back for a moment and understand the mechanics of this piece of interpretation, right? Begins with a pasuk from Psalms, and of course, the thing that the rabbis find most anathema about biblical literature happens, as it happens with Psalms in general. The verse seems repetitive, right? Allah Adonai b'truah. The Lord ascends with truah. Adonai b'kol shofar, right? He ascends with the call of a shofar. Okay, like you literally just said the same thing twice. Why? This question provides fodder for the rabbi. It says, no, these are two different kinds of standings. The first, Allah is going to sit on the seat of judgment. The second, kol shofar, right, is Hashem getting up, Allah, get up from the seat of judgment to sit on the seat of mercy. In this way, this seemingly repetitive verse is now perfectly solved, no longer repetitive. Each half has its own special meaning. Of course, now the kicker, the ultimate thrust of the verse. Keep going, Debbie.
When? On the 7th month.
Right, which is the beginning of the Kriyat Torah, the reading lectionary cycle for which holiday?
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah, exactly, right? So this is a nice small example of a rabbinic homily. It begins with a patichta, begins with a random verse, and then it concludes after a whole lengthy exegesis with the first verse of that week's Torah portion. So it's kind of the opposite of modern rabbis, right? Modern rabbis get up there saying, this week's Parsha, Rashi says, right? No, that's not how the ancient rabbis work. Right? They work backwards, right? They began with something far afield and ends up with the this week's verse. So why is this important? Because out of the 559 petichtot that currently exist in our corpus of Amoraic literature, over 1/3 of them come from, anyone want to guess which book? Sefer Tehillim. Absolutely. Right, so another vector in which Sefer Tehillim seems to have entered Jewish liturgy, particularly in the Amoraic period, was through the rabbis themselves, right? By constantly preaching, using Sefer Tehillim as clearly 1/3 of the time their primary source text, the book itself sort of gets carried along, right? So vector number 1, piety, magic. Vector number 2, you know what? Sometimes the rabbis actually have some pull from the pulpit. You know, us lay people don't like to admit it, but kind of happens. So that's number 2. Let's take a look at another factor that allowed Psalms to become significant in Jewish liturgy in the Amoraic period, and that has to do with the actual setting of this sermon, which was the synagogue. Let's take a look at how architecture shapes the use of literature. All right, so what we have in front of us now is a quotation from the Theodosius Synagogue Inscription. This is one of the earliest texts that we have about the ancient synagogue. So this is from a synagogue inscription from somewhere before the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. And this is from Yerushalayim. Who wants to read? Jeannie, perfect. You want to go for the Greek? Just kidding.
Well, my Greek's a little rusty. Let's see. So we're at art and the flute would play before them. That's where we are, right?
Oh, no, we're on the PowerPoint.
Oh, the PowerPoint. Oh, Theodosius, son of Vitanos, a priest and an archysynagogos, son of an archysynagogos, grandson of an archysynagogos, built the synagogue for the reading of Torah and for the teaching the commandments. Furthermore, the hostel and the rooms and the water installation for lodging needy strangers. Its foundation stone was laid by his ancestors, the elders, and Simonides.
Yeah, so archysynagogos is the, let me be, sort of anachronistic here. It's the old Greek term for shul president, right? So this is the people in charge, literally synagogue head. So in our ancient period, while the Beit HaMikdash is still standing, what is the purpose and function of a synagogue according to our inscription? What's in the inscription and what's not in the inscription? Jason.
Reading the Torah and teaching the commandments and housing needy strangers, nothing about prayer.
Yeah, so again, to be a little bit anachronistic, in its most ancient form, the earliest synagogues were kind of like Jewish community centers, right? You got some education going on there. You've got some housing and feeding people, but liturgy, not so much. Right, that's taking place at the temple. Chaya.
I assume the Greek word was synagogos or something like that, but what would the Jews have called that? Is that what they would have called a Beit Knesset? Is that what?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Beit Knesset, Beit Knishta.
Wait, what was the second one? Sorry.
The Aramaic equivalent, Beit Knishta.
Oh, Beit Knishta. Sorry.
And notice the actual. This is important, by the way. Notice that language, right? Kanash. It's not called Beit Tefillah, right? It's literally called Kanara. Kanash means to gather, right? It's the place where you gather. We actually will, well, at least initially, right? The earliest synagogues were Jewish gathering places. So what we're going to do right now is take a look at the archaeology of one synagogue in particular, and show how a synagogue develops over time and how that architectural development relates to the larger story of how Psalms grew and ultimately how liturgy developed. Jason, was at end.
Also during the time of the Beit HaMikdash, like they were doing the Carbonot, like that was in a certain sense the Gemara even says like the prayer is a supplement or a substitute for the Carbonot. Like, so like people weren't doing like regular old Carbonot, like it was just the Kohanim, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure. And I gave you the earliest example of a synagogue inscription because it's really cool. But the notion of the Beit Knesset in this case as generally a place of gathering, right? Also sort of it maintains that identity even after the destruction of the Second Temple. And when you start to expect the shul you start to sort of, I would assume that the shul, right, would automatically become a place of prayer once the temple is destroyed, right? Because got to locate it somewhere. But the architecture and archaeology tells a little bit of a different story. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the synagogue at Ma'oz Chaim, which is in the Beit Sha'an Valley. Ma'oz Chaim is a little bit, it's close to Tirat Tzvi. If you know where the deli Tirat Tzvi, that's where you get the deli from. But this is the synagogue we're going to talk about, and it's actually a synagogue. What's cool about the synagogue is, like all good people over time, it got remodeled several times. In its earliest layers, stage one, this was the synagogue. Right? It was this nice square. Kaya. Raise your hand. Okay. So it was this square building, nice columns, right? Notice, good gathering place. However, at around the year 400, they expand, right? So they move from building 1 to building 2, or they enlarge it. What are some differences between building 1 and building 2?
The arts, probably Islamic influence or other influence, other architectural influence, not necessarily one particular culture, but influence of wherever you were, Babylon or Egypt, and all those influences of that time, not of that time, probably influenced the arch and the ornate expansive structures.
For sure, right? It certainly got richer, developed, it grew. It might have started to mirror some of the more local churches. Jean-Marie.
It has a strong directionality now with the apse added to it, which I would suggest might be Roman in origin.
Yeah, it's probably
also Christian churches were using the Roman form too.
Absolutely. So there's an apse. If you look on the bottom there, we'll talk a little bit about this soon. There's now a mosaic, nice good images. We'll talk about this soon. There's an anteroom. Ultimately, what happens between building 1 and building 2 is the synagogue itself, its own function morphs. It moves from a Beit Knesset, a place where Jews just gather, into what here is now, with the directionality, a Beit Tefillah. It moves from being a general meeting space to a space devoted particularly to prayer. So
maybe that arch is where they put the Torah.
Absolutely, 100%. That's exactly where they would put the Torah, right? So there's a new function for the synagogue in the later Amoraic period, from gathering place to prayer place. In conjunction with that function of gathering place to prayer space, there's the addition of this mosaic floor on the bottom. We can't discuss the one in Ma'os Chaim because it's too fragmentary, but I want to return to a point that Jason made and push a little further. Jason had mentioned that the sacrifices are intimately linked with prayer. And one might assume that synagogues, once the temple were destroyed, would automatically take the place of the temple. But that seems to have happened slowly over time. As examples here, right? We move from a place of meeting to a place of prayer. And we also get that encoded in the actual images that accompany the synagogue. So let's now so what we're going to see is the mosaic floor from a place in Sephireth, a synagogue that was constructed somewhere between 400 and 600, so at the end of the Amoraic period. But to best understand the synagogue of Sephireth, let's take a look at our final source on the paper handout, and this is source 6. This is a section from Mishnah Bikurim, which records a memory of what happened during the times that the temple stood. Who would like to read Mishnah Bikurim 3, 4, 5? Jody, go for it. Jordy. Hebrew, English,
Okay.
what suits you?
I was so excited I didn't even find it yet. Okay, I found it. Okay. I'll start in Hebrew, I guess. Hachalil makal lifneihem. I'm reading the right thing, right? We good?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, amazing. Hachalil makal lifneihem ad shehim megiin lahar bayit. The flute would play before them until they reached the Temple Mount. Higiu lahar bayit afilo agrippas hamelech notel et hasal al kadfo v'nichnas ad shehu megiin la'azara. So the flutes playing before them until they reached the Temple Mount. They reached the Temple Mount, and King Agrippas would take the basket and place it on his shoulder and walk as far as the temple court.
This is the ceremony of the Bikurim, right? The bringing of the first, context, right? When you have your first fruits, right, every year, you got to bring them to the temple, offer them to God, because got to thank God, period. So this is a memory of what that ceremony looked like. Keep going.
Thanks. Die Bruha Leviim Bishir Armucha Hashem, Kidilitani Lo Simachto Evaili. And then they would get to the temple court, and the Leviim would sing the song, I will extol you, O Lord, for you have raised me up. You have not let my enemies rejoice over me, which is from Psalm 30. Hagozlot Sha'al Gaveh Salim, Hayu Alot, Mash Be'adan, Nisanin Lakohanim. The birds tied to the basket were then offered as whole burnt offerings, and those which they held in their hands, they gave to the Kohanim.
Exactly. So what we know for certain, right, is that, as we mentioned like 50 minutes ago, Tehillim was certainly sung by the Leviim at the temple, right? That's like, this we know, right? So Tehillim certainly had a function in the temple. What we start to see is, so the Tehillim was the temple songbook, essentially. That's encoded in this particular memory where the Leviim are singing Mizmor Lamed as the ceremony is proceeding through the Azara. And the birds are tied to the basket and are being burnt in the as olot. Right. So with this Mishnah in mind, let's now turn our attention to the Mosaic floor of the Tsipori Synagogue. Anyone see any parallels or similarities between our Mishnah and our Mosaic floor? What sort of imagery is encoded on the Mosaic floor of Tsipori?
Birds tied to the basket.
Yeah, birds tied to the basket, right? It's straight out of, it's almost as if it were straight out of the Mishnah. And in fact, we can, and birds tied to the basket, it's not biblical, right? This is totally rabbinic. So the synagogue floor at Tsipori, with both Greek and Hebrew inscriptions, are channeling traditions that are also preserved in the Mishnah. And notice any theme here, by the way, on the Tsipori floor.
Shofar.
Shofar, well, not shofars, actually. It actually spells out what it is in Hebrew.
Chatzotzrot.
Chatzotzrot, right? It's not a shofar, right? These are the chatzotzrot. And the chatzotzrot were important because, I don't remember, when do you blow chatzotzrot?
Rosh Chodesh.
Yeah, and as part of sacrifices as well. At least in the time the Beit HaMikdash was standing, you have chatzotzrot. On the left by the sheep, right, you actually have the hakeves hasheni, right? This is the korban tamid. So what we see, what's the theme of the floor of the Mosaic in Tsipori? What
Korbanot.
Korbanot and sacrifice in temple. Notice on above, which is probably an image of the temple. On the right, you probably have the shiur and the kano. At the end of the Amoraic period, what we start to see is the resurgence and resurrection of synagogue as temple, right? That's the Ma'oz Chayim, right? The movement from just prayer gathering place to temple-like prayer space. That's encoded by the architecture. That's encoded by the images. And along with that likely comes Sefer Tehillim, right? The temple songbook, which fell out of use once the temple was destroyed and has a muted presence in the Tannaitic period, right? Picks up steam and life in the Amoraic period. And as we transition to the Geonic period, really takes off. So what we see so far, or what we've seen right now, are three key vectors for the creation and development of Jewish liturgy as a whole, right? One, piety and magic as part of the same coin. Two, homilies, what the rabbis themselves are saying. And three, the very structure of the synagogue itself, right? Architecture and art can actually shape liturgical expression. Debbie.
So according to what you're saying, during the time of the Tanaim, the mosaics on the floor would not have stuff that would reflect scenes from temple rites.
And to the degree that we have evidence available, that is absolutely correct.
Okay, then I got it. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
No problem. One final vector, because we're running out of time. Someone had mentioned Christians. Indeed, during the Amoraic period, Christian liturgy itself started to develop Psalms as a center of their liturgical practices. So Jews on occasion follow Christians. What you have here are an example of chancel screens. Basically, these were little borders that would here. So in front of, if this was the where the Aron HaKodesh was kept, the Ark, you'd have two screens here that separate, Kodesh from Kodesh Kodashim, and these are the chancel screens. In a church, where the priest would stand where the Ark was, it'd look like this. You got a nice little cross, and basically from the almost exact same workshop, right? You just replace the cross with a menorah, and it's good to go for a shul. Same workshop, different religions, but you know what? It did the job. And the final vector are, of course, other Jews. So until now, we've primarily been speaking about rabbinic Jews, or Jews associated with the rabbinic movement. However, all across the Greco-Roman world, and of course the Sasanian world too, the rabbis and their followers were not the only Jews, and were not the only people practicing Judaism. What we see here is an inscription from Aphrodisias, which is in Asia Minor. And it's this particular inscription that gives us maybe a little bit of hint of the use of Psalms in the liturgy of non-rabbinic Jews. Anyone who would like to read this inscription? Chaya, go for it.
God our helper, the ones listed below are of the decany of the disciples of the lot, those who fervently praise God, erected for the relief of suffering in the community from their own funds, this memorial. I want to say Yael.
Yeah, that's Yael. This is a Latin inscription, so the
Okay.
is a Y.
Yeah, Yael, patron with his or her son Yosuas. Is that like Yoshua?
Yeah, Yoshua. By the way, notice Yael, patron, or it's the masculine term, but we have ancient evidence for female leaders of synagogues. Granted, it's from non-rabbinic Judaism, but we'll take it. Go on.
Archon Theodosius Palatinos, with his son Hilarianos Samuel, leader of the Decany convert Luzes, son of Yosios.
The convert Yosef, son of Yosef.
I'm sorry. I thought that was the word loses. I was like, I don't understand this sentence. My bad. Sorry. Okay. Leader of the Decany. Convert Yosef, son of Yesios. Benjamin, psalm singer. Judas, the sweet-tempered. Yosef, the convert. Same guy, I guess. Sabbatios, son of Amachios. Ammonios, God-fearer. And Antoninos, God-fearer.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on in this crazy, wild inscription, including a female leader of a synagogue community, a convert. You might know names that are both Jewish and clearly Greek and Latin, who are non-Jews. Ammonios and Antonios, God-fearers, are names for people who are Jew adjacent, but not necessarily themselves Jews. So we have non-Jews who are associated with synagogue. There's a lot going on here that we can't discuss at the moment, but for now, let's focus on this Benjamin guy, right? Benjamin, and it's Psalmodos, the Greek, the psalm singer. So it is possible, although uncertain, that the liturgy of non-rabbinic Jews during the times that Amoraim, and maybe possibly before, included Teolim, in which case it's possible that another vector that encouraged the rise of Sefer Tehillim as liturgy was just, what are other Jews doing? Or to turn it into modern terms, right? We can probably see some aspects of the rise of liturgy by looking at what other denominations of Jews are engaging in. How are they changing their liturgy? What are they adding to the liturgy? Do we need to compete? Do we not need to compete? So to take it a step back, right? The factors that encourage the rise of Tehillim as Jewish liturgy in the Amoraic period, and perhaps the factors that explain to some degree the growth of Tefillah as a whole include, first, the complicated relationship between liturgy, piety, and magic, the actual bully pulpit, right? The sermons and preaching of Jewish leaders, the arts and architecture of the very spaces in which liturgy is conducted, and finally, the communities that are adjacent to those who worship, right? Whether it's other Jews or potentially other religions. It's 9 o'clock. I thank you all for your time, but I'm happy to stick around for as long as you want for questions or answers. Well, questions, I can't promise answers. but it's truly been a pleasure studying with you all.
And if you're following along, not as a panelist, but an attendee, use the raise hand function or drop your question in the chat. And if you are in Facebook Live, we also want to hear your questions. Please drop them in the chat. And the floor is open.
right.
Let's see. Jason, I see you have a question.
Yeah. So your definition of magic, I might be mischaracterizing it here, so please forgive me. So like your definition of magic was incantations or something you can do to affect the world around you, whereas piety is something that affects you internally, right? So like when I think of like magic, like I've been watching a lot of Harry Potter. So like I'm thinking of like Harry Potter, you yell Avada Kedavra at me and I die, right? I believe she actually got that from the Gemara. In the Gemara, the rabbis use that phrase to get rid of diseases, as I understand. I could be wrong about that. But like that affects the real world, whereas Havdalah, like you could see a disease dissipating in a person or whatever have you, but like or you could see someone die, right? But like how does Havdalah, something like Havdalah, like affect the world around you? Isn't that more internal? Like I feel as though I have now officially separated between holy and mundane, and like nothing changed, right? I just have like a burnt candle and some grape juice or wine, and that's it.
So excellent question. So now we can actually complicate the definitions of magic and piety just for a little bit. It seems to be the case that magic is, from a sociologically speaking, what the other people do, right? No, which is ultimately right. It's you guys do magic, I do religion or piety. So I was trying to give sort of functionalist definition just for the purposes of this particular setting, but it's actually a lot more complicated. To answer your question, though, I think that we need to bear in mind that in the ancient world, the boundary between self and external wasn't as rigid as it is in modernity. One of the great contributions of modernity was actually the creation of the self. Namely, I am my own, this is like the Enlightenment project, right? I am my own individual entity, capito ergo sum, right? I exist independent of other things. I affect change. Really before that, especially the ancient world, things were a lot more fluid. So you could be possessed by demons, you can export yourself to other humans, and sort of both magic and piety traded on that complicated, shifting definition of, or more fluid definition of the self. So while you might not see change when you're reciting Tehillim, there was this understanding that, by reciting these words, you're combating forces, the forces of evil, the demons that were coming to get you. And that's also true of Havdalah, which is taking place at night, sometimes in the synagogue. And truth is, you find this in ritual all the time, right? Liminal moments are always, right, liminal being the space in between, are always the most dangerous. When you're moving between the door, when you're moving from light to dark, when you're getting married, right? Or when you're moving to the chuppah, you're at your most vulnerable, which is why you need extra protection. The breaking of the glass, for example, in Jewish weddings, while nowadays has been reinterpreted as a symbol for, not nowadays, but even medieval period, a symbol for the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, actually was an anti-demonic practice through and through. Which is also why you find a lot of parallels between like marriage and death. The Kittel, that's an example, at those key in-between moments. So whenever you're dealing with liminality, you might also be dealing with demons. When you're dealing with demons, a good psalm will do, especially in the ancient world, or at least from the perspective of antiquity.
Two things. Just a technical thing first is it possible for me to send the PowerPoint out to the participants? Because
yes, sure. It will.
In fact,
okay, great.
Kayla has it.
Thank you. And then the other thing that I just wanted to ask about is who were these non-rabbinic Asian minor, Asian, whatever, Jews in Asia Minor, like that we were just looking at, like who were they? What was their deal? Can you give me a little more context about that?
Of course. The truth is we don't know much about them other than by the inscriptions such as that they've left us. And they're not just in Asia Minor, right? They're in Egypt, and they're in various other places in the ancient world. They're the Jews who weren't the rabbis or weren't affiliated with the rabbinic movement. Presumably, they've been living there for quite a while, right? We have evidence of synagogues all over, in Tauropos, in Sardis. We don't really know what these Jews were doing, other than they were practicing some form of Judaism that may be similar to rabbinic Judaism, but not quite parallel.
Do we have reason to believe that they were in some, like there was some magic, like a schism there, or like what makes you say with confidence that they were non-rabbinic? I don't really know what like the measuring stick for rabbinicness is, but
for sure. So this goes back to a much longer historical debate as to what's the place of the rabbis in the ancient world, right? And particularly even in Bavel and Eretz Yisrael, there's the assumption that people tend to make that the moment the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, like here come the rabbis and everyone's a rabbi, right? Or everyone's following the rabbis. Really not quite true. Much like Christianity itself, right? There existed at the fall of the temple many different kinds of Judaisms. Over the course of time, Chazal gained popularity such that by the early Middle Ages, like, your Judaism was rabbinic, or it was some way, or it was in some way anti-rabbinic, like the Karaites. But in that interim period, there were a lot of Jews that were reading the Bible, that were interpreting the Bible, but weren't doing it in necessarily the same ways that the rabbis were. I mean, like what happened to for example, right, the Kohanim, right? They didn't just disappear. They probably went off somewhere and tried to form their own Judaism that failed. Same thing with the Tzaddukim, right? All these groups didn't just like go poof the moment the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. And of course, there were Jews that were living outside of Eretz Yisrael during the times of the Beit HaMikdash. So these were probably these groups, right, who were, they had Torah, they had some form of commandments, but they probably weren't keeping kashrut in the way that the rabbis envisioned kashrut, or halacha in that particular sense. Jason.
I'm sorry, just very quickly. When did you think the difference between the rabbis and everyone else cemented?
The answer to that is slowly over time.
Okay.
As any good historical development, right? This is the problem with everything. No one only in retrospect do we plant a flag and say, okay, guys, we're in a new period. So what happens really slowly is you start to get in the 2nd century Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, right, who's a patriarch, right? So he's a guy who's like a local, he's like, the local warlord, not warlord in literal war, but he's the local chieftain. So he's got some form of authority and clout with the current Roman government. So there are probably people who are really interested in him, and he's gathering a group of individuals themselves. Rabbis go to synagogues and they preach, they gain more popularity that way. So it's a slow process.
All right.
Also, sorry, Kayla.
I just want to cut it off kind of at 2 more questions. So as it's getting a little closer to 9:10, I'm also really glad to hear that so many people are interested in kind of the earlier period of Rabbinic Judaism. That's very exciting. But on a similar topic to what Jason was asking, Dylan asked, were these, I guess, non-Rabbinic Jews also possibly Karaites or a different sect? And after Dylan, I see you, Jason. Oh.
So they weren't Karaites per se, mostly because we don't have evidence of Karaites until Anan, which is 800s, 900s. So these aren't Karaites per se. Are they a different sect of Judaism? Maybe, possibly. Although, honestly, what do we know of sects of Judaism to begin with, right? We know that there are some people, we know a lot from Josephus in the New Testament, right? We know there were Pharisees, we know there were Sadducees, we know there were Essenes, and we also, there's a group from the Dead Sea who are, calling themselves the Achad, right? These are the people of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But as much as, these are the sort of like typographed image that Josephus just give you, like there were a ton of other Jews, some of whom might have said, oh, I am in X. And some of them were just say, I don't know, I'm a Jew. I do Jew things. Not to be totally contemporary, but you actually kind of sort of see that today in sort of the modern constructions of Judaism, right? You have the people who are like firmly adherent to a particular like denominational identity, or I'm an Orthodox Jew, I'm a conservative Jew, I'm a Reformed Jew. But you also have this sort of growing, I think, group of Jews like, I'm just a Jew, like keep halacha somewhat, like I do Jew stuff, like I'm a Jew. Like don't try to pigeonhole me into a particular identity. So I think you actually had a large class of those people as well in the ancient world, or at least that's the sort of picture you get if you try to pigeonhole, not millions, hundreds, at least hundreds of thousands of Jews into 4 categories. And I look in history, we just don't have a lot of information sometimes. Sad, but I wish we had more documents and more inscriptions. We could have a finer and better textured image of what Jewish life and even Jewish identity looked like. But there were certainly more than just rabbis.
All right. To everyone who has joined us, thank you. Dr. Berkovitz, may I share your email with people who've signed up so that if they have any further questions, they can get in touch with you?
Of course.
All right, thank you. And to everyone who joined us today as part of Night Seder at Wintersman 2021-2022, thank you, whether you were on Zoom, on Grisha Live, or on Facebook. We will continue our Wintersman programming, at least our Night Seder open to the public programming next week, Tuesday, January 4th at 8 p.m. with Ms. Dahlia Wolfson, who will be teaching a class turning to Tachinus. I did not pronounce that right. Turning to our Yiddish kind of vernacular prayers. Thank you for the correction. And you can find out more about this class as well as all of our upcoming programming on drisha.org/classes. And thank you, Dr. Berkowitz. This was an excellent opportunity to learn with you.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation for the 2 want.
All right, everyone. Have a lovely night, a lovely day, and happy learning in the future.